I'm the Reverend David Marshall. Welcome to A Bridge Between. It's a bridge where we bridge our knowledge of the gospel. We bridge because we live in two different areas. And Alex, what else do we do?
We marvel at that you've been practicing that in the mirror for
Oh my
hours.
gosh, I have. Yeah, this is my practice to be Alex. Can you please introduce yourself, sir? Reverend sir.
I am Father Alexander Har, and I am also on a bridge between here with Dave Marshall. And I think today we're bridging conversations about authority, which I think are going to get very interesting because we're going to disagree on a few things.
Oh, a few. There's nothing we have yet to agree on.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and folks, the way this worked is that I had suggested just hit record because we didn't think we were actually going to talk about this. We probably didn't want to record it, and that usually means it's a good idea to do it. So, that what we're going to do today is the scripture is for this coming Sunday, the 28th, and we're not going to read you any of it. We're just simply going to, because we're going to talk about all the scripture and how it ties in together. And Alex, what do you think ties the scripture in together?
Well, I think something that we were talking about ahead of time or before we pressed record, which is the concept of authority. And just
Concept?
briefly, I just want to point out, go ahead, sorry.
Concept of authority?
The idea, the concept, the reality of authority, where authority comes from,
Ah, there we go. Good.
you
Perfect.
know, and just briefly, just to show for those who are watching and those who are listening, um, this is the fourth Sunday after the Epiphany that we're talking about, and so we are talking about the Deuteronomy reading, the Corinthians reading, the reading from the Gospel of Mark, and Psalm 111. So we're not going to summarize everything. We will give you a couple of highlights along the way from each story, but the thread through all of it is authority.
Authority. Very good. The other thing we bridge between is that Alex and I are both dads,
Yep.
which means we have no authority at home. I'm just kidding.
Well,
Okay, well, maybe I'm
we
not.
we we have authority to say no, you can't go there today, or did you do your homework is the
Well,
question. That's where my authority has been the last few days.
right, right. I heard a joke and I forgot what it was, but the punchline is, "But thanks, Dad. We'll appeal this to a higher authority," meaning mom. So I thought that was kind of funny, but
Well, there's
someday it might
definitely
actually.
some veto power. There's definitely some veto power involved.
Yeah.
Um, but to kind of get into the topic, and like I said, I really want to get into some of these readings. We have Moses, who has been this prophetic voice and this prophetic authority for the Israelites, but he is not always going to be there, right?
Right.
Eventually, Moses will go away and somebody else will come along, and he foreshadows that there will be another prophet that they shall heed, and that this is what's been requested by them from the Lord, and that they need to heed his voice. And so
And
for
why did they
me,
request it?
why did they request it?
Because God spoke to them directly from the mountain and they started screaming, they covered their ears and like, please don't do that again. No. And they sent Moses up the hill to go talk to him. And that's where
Yeah,
that quote comes in almost in the middle of the quote of, quote, if I hear the voice of the Lord, my God, anymore or ever again see this great fire, I will die. This whole sense of like, no, 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 no. We need an in-between. We need a mediator. We need somebody who can do that.
right.
And so the Lord uh, raised up Moses, and now they're raising up the rest. Can I talk briefly about Deuteronomy, though?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Um, the reason, so when I start doing this in my, so for those listening on iTunes or whatever, I'm doing something my wife hates, and that's where I talk and I turn like this in my chair, and I do that when I get excited. So I'm going to stop. I'm just going to calm down for a moment. Starting Deuteronomy 6 and then running through, I don't have my notes, probably through, it's past 20. What Moses is doing in Deuteronomy, it starts with commandment number 1 and talks at length about how commandment number 1 works within their community. Then he goes to commandment number 2 and then commandment number 3. And so when we get to Deuteronomy, halfway through Deuteronomy, he has gotten to commandment number 5, which for those that are driving around, and if you want to shout out what that commandment is, go for it now. But in the meantime, I will tell you it is honor your father and honor your
Mother.
mother, right? And um, in that middle commandment is where we get this thing about authority from Moses, from God, and that you will have others coming along. And I think it's cool to, because a lot of folks that I talk to about the Ten Commandments get hung up on honor your father and mother because
Mhm.
some of them have had mothers and
Yeah,
fathers that um, acted without honor. And so
correct.
so if you look at that as what Moses is saying is that there's one word and it's authority. So honor those with authority.
Right. And I think the question becomes, what does it mean to honor
Yep.
someone? What does it mean to respect their authority, that the authority they have over you?
Yep.
And how does that work in a world where, as you say, people are not always honorable? There are people who've had experiences with mothers or fathers or caregivers that have been not only negative but abusive.
Right.
So what does it mean then to honor them?
Right. Right. Which is not the topic for today, but that is something we probably will get to at some
Mm-hmm.
point.
Yeah.
So we have this authority, and then do you want to talk about authority in the First Corinthians reading?
The interesting thing about the authority in the First Corinthians reading is it's talking about food sacrificed to idols,
Hmm.
and this problem that I know that you'll probably be able to express a lot better than I can because you're the Greek scholar versus myself. Um, is this notion of, if a food is sacrificed to an idol, I really shouldn't eat it. But what about the people in the community who don't believe in that anymore, and they go to somebody's house and it's there, and it's been sacrificed to an idol? And these were real pastoral concerns,
Yes.
for people of that time period. And where do you think authority is falling into here?
Like, what is Paul talking about
Where,
authority?
yeah, I mean, where do you think that authority is manifesting itself in this passage?
Well, first, I'm one of those folks that believes the church in Corinth wrote at least one letter to Paul saying, "Can
Hmm.
you clarify some things for me or
Hmm.
for us?" And because the way that this whole paragraph begins, it is as if there is a conversation going on. And towards the end of this particular letter, he's like, "Okay, now concerning food sacrificed to idols,"
Right.
to show that they have already questioned that. Um, but this was a relatively inexpensive or free, as some might say, access for protein for people of that day. That you would go to a particular temple where some
Hmm.
wealthy person had donated some food and had sacrificed it, and then it's kind of a like on a cruise ship, it's a buffet. You just walk up and you can start eating. And the question that Paul raised is um, the authority on that. There is no such thing. There are no false idols. There's only one God. And so if you sacrifice to something that's not real, it's not a real sacrifice. So
Right.
feel free to eat, right? It doesn't matter. But what does matter is if somebody sees you doing it and there is a new convert who is beginning in their faith and they see you eating it and they think that you also believe in that pagan god and you're following Jesus, and that will cause them to stumble. And so Paul writes famously at the end of this
Hmm.
that if food is a cause of someone's falling, I will never eat meat so that I may not cause one of them to fall. This whole, I'm going to abstain from the whole thing just so I don't cause somebody to fall. And this is where we get humility and authority. That Paul's like, you've got the authority, you can eat it, it doesn't matter. But in humility, let me give up all of that so as to not to cause somebody to fall.
I think there's one more element here, and you began to talk a little bit about it when you mentioned the new believer. And I think that there's authority, there's humility, there's also responsibility.
Oh, yeah, right, right.
If I know that there's somebody near me who is just starting in the faith and they have some questions and they're not sure about certain things, I have a responsibility to be sharing knowledge, to be sharing experience, and to being careful what I do and how I do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a lot of spiritual misunderstandings that can happen. And I think when Paul says, I won't even eat meat,
Yeah.
well, first of all, clearly he wasn't speaking to the church in South Carolina, where my friend is. He's speaking to people to say, if this is a stumbling block, the most important thing is Jesus, and let's get rid of the stumbling block.
Right.
You know, and he himself is saying that the authority here isn't me. The authority is the fact that it's Christ.
Right. Yes. Good. And
And
then,
finally, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, after you.
I said, and finally, we have the gospel.
That we do. So I've got a trivia question for you.
Okay.
In Mark, what is the first time Jesus is identified as the Holy One of God?
By an evil spirit,
Right. Yes.
because
That refers to us in the plural.
even the demons must confess that Jesus
Yes.
is Lord. And
Yes.
that's what that blew me away, by the way, when somebody began to explain that to me, that the demons know who Jesus is.
Yeah.
They just won't submit to him.
Right.
I mean, in the sense of they will not submit to him as Lord of all and follow him. But they sometimes have a step ahead of us in that they actually acknowledge who Jesus really is.
Well, yeah. So he has authority over spirits.
Mm-hmm.
So they know exactly who he is. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's interesting as everyone else is learning. Um, the other part I want to highlight is that um, Jesus and his disciples went to Capernaum, and the
Mm-hmm.
Sabbath came. He entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one as having
Authority.
authority, and not just as a scribe. So not somebody who is a literate person who can pull out the scroll and read it,
Yep.
or ask questions, or suggest a dialogue around this.
Yeah.
That he was telling them with authority what it is.
And I love that, because it's a big difference between you and I getting up and preaching about a piece of scripture and Jesus kind of looking at us and saying, like, yeah, I remember when I wrote that and inspired it into somebody.
Right, right. Um, yeah. Okay. So for those that have that particular Christology, then yes, that's exactly
Well,
what.
he inspired. I mean, he knows all. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you're talking my Christology, so yes, I
Yeah.
do
Okay.
know, and that's what I believe.
So let's take this kind of to the next step in the part of our conversation, which is we recognize that authority is prevalent as a theme within these readings.
Yes.
When we get up and preach about this, there's a sense of we have authority to be standing up there
Right.
to be preaching about this. But you and I also, in a dichotomy here, we have authority, but we also submit to authority
We're
as
under
well.
authority. Right.
We are under authority.
Yes.
It was supposed to be kind of a thing where you kind of pick it up, but I'll keep going.
I well, see, that's the thing is that I'm a fish, and I saw the lure, and I'm just like swimming,
So the
just
lure,
swimming around it.
the worm in which I will say is, let's take a moment and talk about what it means to have authority as priests
Oh,
in the
right.
life of a parish, in the
Right.
life of worship, in the life of preparing elements and materials for worship, and then getting up and preaching and caring for people.
Yes.
It's
It's
easy
it's
for us, if we're not careful, to abuse our authority.
it's also easy to what's the word I'm looking for? To not use it.
Correct. Correct.
So there has to be some sort of balance in between there. And by the way, I don't get to see the look of disappointment on your face very often. And as a fish just swam by the lure, I got to see it, and that just makes me happy. But
So, so here's the central question that you and I were wrestling with, which is, I'm one of those individuals that it was just ingrained in me, even before I went to seminary, even before I really began formation, to stick to the lectionary, to really keep tight to it, and that if that's what it was on Sunday for that reading, I got to live with it. Unless
right,
there's an alternate that is provided, for example, a feast of a saint or a special day or something,
right,
but to stick to it. And
Yeah.
while we can add in terms of add verses to a particular piece of scripture, usually we know we're not asked to take away or to cut a piece of scripture because of that. So that's kind of my approach.
Yes. And what do you think about the Jewish philosophy of, but if you add, sometimes you take away? Uh,
Well, sometimes, yeah, you can kind
sometimes
of
you
go
do.
down and
Right.
add a new theme from what you
Yes.
were trying to talk about.
Yes. Now, for those that have seen Harry Potter, you'll know that there's the sorting hat and that people are divided into different houses. So, Alex and I in seminary went to two different houses, if you will.
Hmm.
You were one that was in Tennessee, and I was one in California. Um, there are there are things that hold. It's both Episcopal tradition. These are both Episcopal seminaries. They're
Hmm.
actually graduate schools, and we get a master's of divinity.
Hmm.
But we are raised with different types of I don't want to say traditions. Um, so you went to Swanee, right?
Yes, and so there might be some different values around this. Is what I'm
I don't know
saying,
if it's values.
or
I
just
think the values are the
interpretation,
same. I
interpretations.
Yeah, I think it is viewing what the 21st century is going to hold for the church.
All right,
Um,
perfect. I can go with that.
and so my seminary tradition was so we have the Book of Common Prayer. I'm not going to hold it up. You guys know what it looks like. So we went through the four forms that are there: A, B, C, D. We also talked about Form 1, Form 2, and they taught us how to write our own Eucharistic prayers. And they taught us how these things were formed, and then we started writing them ourselves.
Hmm.
Did you do that at Swanee?
No, we did not.
See? And folks, I think that's it. I think that that's where we start to see things differently.
Right.
So I took an advanced preaching class from the Presbyterian School for Theology. And so the preaching methods, and then I took a different symposium thing from one of the best Methodist teachers that's out there, homiletic, seminary, semin. I'm just I'm going to have to slow down here for sermonizing, which we call
Hmm.
homiletical stuff.
Yeah.
And so grabbing from those various traditions that have a more flexible view, that which, by the way, are still on the Revised Common Lectionary, as is the Episcopal Church,
Right.
that putting all that stuff together. So what I did, like this past Sunday, is I went full on into the Jonah reading,
Yeah.
um, and and then I preached about the allegorical side of the story of Jonah. Um, and that can't happen if we use just the small piece that the lectionary had put in place. I'm going to say it's from my seminary that's where I learned how to do this.
Okay. Well, but so let me give an example of where you and I have differed on something. So, for example, I'm not sure how often it comes up in the lectionary, but Jesus begins to preach on the topic of divorce.
Yes.
Okay. And one of the most difficult sermons to write is on this topic because it has affected so many people. It's
Yeah.
affected many people in our congregations,
Right.
and not just that it's affected them perhaps now and before, but also their interactions with the church before has sometimes been painful as the church has reacted to what is the ministry or the place of a divorced person in the life of the church.
Right.
And so for me, I'm like, well, the text is there. I'm just going to lean into it,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
and I'm going to try to be as pastoral as I can, but I'm going to try to break down the passage as best I can and try to produce something that makes you think, but also gives peace, affirms God's love, that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, and in certain cases, you have decided that you don't want to preach on that text.
Well, in certain congregations. So
Yeah, yeah,
in San Diego, I had the youngest congregation in the diocese. Um, and we are right near the south gate for Camp Pendleton, which is one of the largest Marine Corps facilities in the country. I'm sorry, it is the largest in the country. It's one of the largest in the world. So we had a lot of young and folks who were thinking about getting married and others who had just recently gotten married. Um, there is one particular way, there are many approaches, but the approach I took to that particular passage in that particular congregation is different than the congregation that I have now,
Right.
with the with our average age and um, with the divorce rate that we have, that every single family in my congregation, 100% have been affected by a divorce in the family,
Yeah.
whether first or second party, right? That it's
Mhm.
um, and so instead of beginning their new lives and beginning marriage and finding a place that can talk about ground on which to stand and then to grow, I am now in a congregation that has tell me about the ground I have already walked on and the
Mhm.
unevenness of it.
Yeah.
And so I think that comes, well, I don't know. So with authority, uh, it always comes down to context and who we are, um, in which community are we in. Does that make sense?
And and I bring this up not to shame or contradict anything, but that it's the authority is something that we are conscious of
Yeah.
in the church, because one of the reasons I love the lectionary is that it's possible to go to churches that don't use a lectionary, and they don't sometimes end up talking about the difficult topics.
No.
They sometimes don't end up talking about the difficult readings of Scripture. And in our tradition, in the Episcopal tradition, we are immersed in Scripture throughout the service, specifically, though, in the liturgy of the Word. And I forget, and I apologize, I forget which psalm it is, but there's a psalm where they usually the lectionary will, or the readers will kind of leave out that last line, and it's talking about the sorrow that the Israelites felt as they were taken
Yeah.
to Babylon.
Yeah.
You know, by the rivers of
Right.
Babylon, we sat down and wept. And at the end, it talks about smashing children's heads.
Right.
And I purposefully preached on that because it was an opportunity to preach on anger
Mm-hmm.
and hurt. And so I guess, for me, my approach is to try to lean into it, to have some of those difficult conversations. But I mean, if we're preaching, we're always going to have difficult conversations.
We are, but that's also part of the authority that has been entrusted to us. Is that
Yeah.
we need to know our congregations, where they are in their life of faith, where the
Yeah.
Scripture is, and to start putting those bridges together. The Psalm 111, which we have this particular Sunday, verse
Hmm.
10, begins with the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And
Hmm.
I know of people who have been raised in a Roman Catholic school tradition where nuns pounded that into them, um, in not the way that I think the script, that particular piece of
Yeah.
scripture was intended to be heard.
No, and
And
I know exactly what you're talking about. It wasn't the nuns that did it to me when I was in the Roman Catholic tradition and attending parochial school,
yeah,
but I had to unlearn what it meant to have fear of the Lord.
right,
I
right,
had to unlearn. So, so perhaps really, going back to the scripture readings for this Sunday, if you're getting ready to preach or you're contemplating these scriptures, we look to the authority of Jesus. We look to the authority of God. We look to the authority of people in our community who have leadership. And a good question to ask is, where does that authority come from? If I think of Christ, his authority comes because he is not just Lord of all, but I think of his sacrifice,
hmm
you know, the ransom he has paid for me. If I think of the authority of God the Father, I think of the authority of my Creator. So it's good to have these questions about authority, because that's one of the reasons I love the Episcopal tradition. We
yeah,
get to question some things, and we get to have different approaches. So I'm still convinced, though, that if you were to come to my parish on a Sunday or to Father Dave's parish on a Sunday, you'd probably get something similar, even though there'd be two kind of different ideas.
yes. If I can circle back to Psalm 111, verse 10, the fear of the
Hmm.
Lord, fear is incorrectly translated in English. Can I
Hmm.
just say it?
Correct. Oh,
That
yes.
the Hebrew word that they're using would have to combine respect and obey. There is no word in English that can take respect and obey and put it together.
Hmm.
And I'm going to get really critical here. So if you don't mind, Alex, I
Go
think
ahead.
it is a lazy English translation that gives power to clergy or to those in authority by using the word fear instead of going deeper into what the word means. The phrase, the fear of the Lord is the beginning, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. In my opinion, from what I understand with Hebrew, is the better translation is this: it is wise to respect and obey the Lord. Those who act accordingly have good understanding. The Lord's praise endures forever.
Yes.
That is the, I think, the better rendition, or the better.
And
But
if,
then it comes down to authority of who am I to say, because I'm not a Hebrew scholar, um, that how do we do that? And then we also have this thing called tradition that Alex and I are wrapped up in. And for us, scripture and tradition and reason all roll in together. Um, and so what I'm doing, what you can say from people from my seminary are doing, are jettisoning some of our tradition in order
mhm.
to strive for these type of things, and that they say that we're wrong.
Right. And I think that's where the diversity within our tradition also presents itself, where you were trained, where you were prepared, and people who even work together in the same parish can have different ideas and
Mhm.
experiences of this authority. I think, just go back to finish the thought about what you said with the Hebrew translation. I think that helps a great deal for somebody to see God not as an adversary, but as somebody who accompanies us.
Yes.
Um, and a person who has authority can accompany us. In fact, we look for people with authority who will walk alongside of us and mentor us and care for us and love us, especially if we're talking about parents and honoring your father and your mother.
Hmm.
So as we kind of bring our time to a close here today, I'm thankful that you and I were able to have that part of the conversation, because there are going to be different approaches to certain liturgical or other aspects of practice between us.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that A, you and I both don't have authority within the church,
Right.
and B, it doesn't mean that people aren't getting something out of it.
Yeah. So last week, you and I had this great conversation about how we are not interchangeable,
Hmm.
that we are different people, we are unique. And the same goes for our congregations. Congregations are
Hmm.
not interchangeable. They
Correct.
are they're beautiful and loving and amazing and diverse for each one, and each one has, like, in business we used to talk about company culture, and each
Yep.
company has a particular culture to it. And
Absolutely.
those that have been in the Air Force or in the Navy or the Army, you know that there's a culture that goes with each one of those. And I didn't mention the Marines because they're a part of the Navy.
And you're going to get a lot of hate mail now, and we need to be ready for
See,
that.
I waited.
And there goes the show. Okay.
And there
Um,
we
so
go. Yes.
so I am thankful, Dave, for you, and that you exercise authority in the church, and I respect it and look to it, and I hope that we can continue to have these kinds of conversations in the future.
Well, it's very important stuff. And for those that are interested in what we're talking about, you can feel free to contact us, email us, send us a message, however that works. Ask questions,
Mhm.
challenge us. That would be great. That we would love to hear what you're thinking and how you're balancing on that. And for those, I'm not going to mention names, but there are some clergy who listen to this to come up with their sermon on Sunday. We didn't give you one this time, folks. So, or maybe we
I think
did.
we did. I think we did. I think we did, especially talking about how all the thread is authority. I think we did. We earned
Okay,
it this week. Yeah,
right. If anything, somebody might just decide to preach on verse 10 of Psalm 111. What does
nothing wrong
fear
with that.
mean? And feel
Nothing.
free to then jump into verse 5 about he gives food to those who fear him. Again, fear, not a right translation. So, and if you think fear is the right translation, write us. Let us know. It would be great to hear what you have to say.
All right. So, Dave, I think it's safe to say we'll catch everybody in the next one, and we'll look forward to maybe getting some feedback on some of those sermons this week.
That that would be fantastic. But Alex, it's always a pleasure. Very much enjoy your time and your energy and your presence. And thank you for all that you do and being my
You as
friend.
well. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. God
Catch you in
bless.
the next one.